Okay, so today we're going to be doing 2 book reviews, both spoiler-free, for The Tropic of Serpents by Marie Brennan and Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko. So, sci-fi fantasy, I guess, and fantasy. Adult YA, if you're interested. I'm going to start with this because it'll probably be shorter since it's a sequel. So again, spoiler free. I might do a spoiler discussion for the whole series when I finish the whole series because I have a lot of thoughts that I'd like to talk more in depth about, but I'm keeping it spoiler free as I go through the series book by book. Anyway, so this is the sequel to The Natural History of Dragons, which I read last month, I'm pretty sure, 2 months ago, who knows, what is time? And the way I kind of pitch this is that it feels like a Jane Austen novel, but with science and dragons. So this is the sequel. It takes place, I think 3 years after the first book, and this is a long series of memoirs. This is Lady Trent's memoirs as she goes off on these expeditions, studying and trying to be, being a naturalist, someone who studies dragons. So dragons in the story kind of serve as a backdrop to the story. This really feels like a Renaissance era story with dragons that happen to exist in this world. Sometimes they're described as a menace, sometimes they're a mystery, but in general they exist. And this is Lady Trent's, Isabella's expeditions and studies. It's very focused on her scientific findings, on her studies, and especially in this one, it's very focused on a lot of politics, a lot of political maneuverings that are happening around here. This time they've gone to the tropics and they're studying the swamp wern. I actually don't know how to pronounce this, but anyway, they're studying a specific type of dragon in the tropics. So we're dealing with a very different climate, we're dealing with very different cultures, and a lot of different politics that she's sorting through, which I really enjoyed. I read a couple of reviews and apparently this is a book that some people find quite boring. So I don't know, if you don't like slow pacing, maybe pass. But I don't know, I really enjoy it because I'm a huge fan of Jane Austen. I'm a massive fan of her books. These white books right here are my Jane Austen collection. And it really does feel like I'm in that era. And one thing that Jane Austen does really well is within her stories, she has so much social commentary and she takes a very critical eye to society while also having a really delightful story. And I think that that's exactly what this does. These stories are very quick reads to me. You know, it's very easy to just fly through it. It's not anything extremely complex. It's not anything extremely, vast. It feels like a contemporary focused on science, but dragons. So it's just really easy to read. But at the same time, there's so much critical eye to society and to the double standards that Lady Trent is facing in this time. And there's so many great nuggets that she says, the way she pushes back and the way she fights for her dreams and for being viewed as a scholar and being viewed as someone who has something to give and who deserves to be making these studies as well. It's such a delightful read to me. But like I said, dragons are kind of more of a backdrop. We're focused more on Lady Trent and on her studies and her findings and on her struggles, and a lot less on dragons, the mythical, amazing creatures. So I definitely do wish that there were a little bit more of dragons in the story. I wish they weren't quite so much of a backdrop and a lot more of something that we got to interact with and be in awe of and be excited for, but I'm actually really okay with the setup of this, with how much focus we have on dragons. Even though I would like more, I still think that it's done really well. I think probably the main fault of this series so far, both of these books, is that the character work isn't always strong. I think Lady Trent, Isabella, is a very strong character. I actually love that we're following her memoirs because I love this kind of distanced, almost detached way that she views her life, where she speaks very bluntly about her failings and about, you know, people assume that I did this for some noble reason, but the reality is I didn't. I just wanted to advance my studies, you know, like this very blunt way of looking at herself, looking at her flaws, at looking at the mistakes she made, as well as, you know, she's very proud of her accomplishments and just that very honest look of it. Also, there's a lot of humor that comes along with her reflecting on her most embarrassing times, which I really, really appreciate. I really like the style of memoirs, and I think it works really well for attaching me to Isabella, our main character, a lot. But a lot of the side characters, I think, don't get very much depth. And maybe that's because of the memoir format. Maybe that's because she is not telling their story and she's just they're part of her story, I guess. So it feels a little bit less immersive, but I do wish that we got a little bit more depth from the side characters. Right now, this series is, you know, I don't really rate books anymore, but it's not something that I'm in love with, but it's something that I'm really, really, really enjoying, and I'm definitely planning to continue with, and I don't see myself quitting. You know, I see myself seeing it all the way through because it's just really, really different from anything else I'm reading. And with the amount that I read and the number of books that I've read, I feel like when I find something that's so completely different from anything else that I read and enjoyable, I get very attached to it because I'm excited for something that feels so fresh, and this series definitely feels really, really fresh. On to Raybearer. So I'm reviewing these two books together just because I read them within the same time frame, and usually if it's not, you know, a really hot topic book, I'll usually couple up books that I review, but I'm actually really glad that I'm reviewing these together because I have very similar pros and cons for both of them, so it kind of works out very well. So Raybearer follows our main character, Tarisai, who has grown up with a very absent mother, I guess you could. She's had a very neglectful childhood. Nobody touches her except for her mother, who only visits her once every couple of years. Everybody's very distanced. She finds herself deeply wanting intimacy from anyone, just any kind of affection and touch and a deeper relationship with. There's a reason why they're doing this, though. There's a reason why they're keeping her so heavily in the dark, and why they're not wanting to touch her or interact with her too much. When Tarisai comes of age, she is sent off to the palace, where she will compete with a bunch of other children her age when she's 15. No, wait, she goes off when she's 10, but most of the story takes place, it doesn't matter. She goes off to the palace and she competes with a bunch of other children to be one of the upcoming emperor, the emperor's son, Dio, become one of his council members. So the way this kind of magic system and setup works in the story is the emperor of this world is surrounded by people from all different regions of this world, all different cultures and people groups, who come basically to declare their love to him and their loyalty to him, so that he can he can choose his council members, and then he'll connect to them with his ray, which will give them kind of a mind link, as well as grant him a level of immunity. Each person that competes to be a council member has a specific ability. Tarisai's ability is if she touches someone, she's able to take their memory. She gives it back, but she's able to take their memory, see it, and basically kind of like download information about them, and then she returns it. Which is why when you're trying to keep something from her, touching her is dangerous. So because of a series of things that I'm not going to explain to you here in the spoiler-free review, Tarisai is bound to her mother to fulfill a command. And what her mother commanded her to do was to win Dio's trust, become a council member, and then kill him. So Tarisai is fighting against this binding thing that she has to do, while also gaining relationships and friendships and family and healthy dynamics among people for the first time in her life. Anyway, you know what? That's all the information I'll give. As far as the setup and the plot, all this is established pretty early on. Pros and cons. Pros. I love the world building in this story. The setting it's very immersive. I think that the lore around this world and the different cultures, the different people groups that serve the emperor and their different hairstyles, their different cultures, their different songs, their different belief systems. So this is a YA fantasy, and I think that the scope of this world, while still feeling really digestible and really understandable, was just handled really well. I felt really immersed in all the different things that I was learning about. I felt really fascinated by the lore of the world and the different groups of people, what they believed and how they functioned and how they grew up and lived. It was just really, really fascinating to me. I think the setting was just something that I've never read before that I really, really liked. I think that Ifueko did an incredible job of creating something so unique in this world, as well as the different elements of the magic were really interesting. The magic is one thing that I feel a little bit mixed on, because I really like the idea of the magic of this world, but there are certain things that I still have a lot of questions about. Now, Ifueko definitely is not an info dumper, and she is not just explaining everything about the magic right off the bat. We're getting just little pieces, little reveals, which is the way I like to enjoy magic systems. But now that I've finished the first book, I still have some very specific questions about the mechanics of it, of like, okay, why did it work this way in this scenario, but then the same magic works a different way in a different scenario? That I don't feel like everything has been explained in a way that I feel like the magic is necessarily well written yet. I'm holding out judgment because there's another book, and I'm definitely gonna read it because I really enjoyed this first book. And I'm waiting for certain answers. I'm waiting for certain things to get fleshed out a little bit better so that it doesn't feel inconsistent. Right now, I'm just reserving judgments. But despite that, I still think that the magic system is really interesting, and I like it a lot. It's just, the writing is so immersive. I love the setting. The general plot, I think, was executed really, really well. When we have a lot of setup, there's certain things where it looks like it's gonna go in a certain direction. It looks like certain very typical and very standard tropes are going to be used, and I think that Ifueko does an amazing job of subverting those expectations and subverting those tropes and giving me a plot that I wasn't expecting. Certain reveals that came up that really, really excited me when they happened, because I was like, oh, didn't see this coming. This is something very different. I'm really happy about it. As well as the main villain, the main antagonist, the main person that we're fighting against in this story, the bad guy, the bad person of this story, I like her so much. I was, in the beginning, in the setup with this antagonist, I was very curious because it seemed like there was a lot more happening than just, here's my mission, do something terrible, right? It seemed like there had to be more to it. And when we got more information on this antagonist, and when we learned more of the motivations and the background and the why, listen, with antagonist, I get really tired of the I'm bad because I like bad. Like, that can be written really well. Some people are just really bad people, and that can be written really well, but a lot of times it's not. A lot of times it's boring. And I love when an antagonist seems awful, and they are awful. I mean, she's awful, but then once you learn a little bit more about how she got here and why she's doing what she's doing, and then it's like, oh, I really understand your motivations. This makes sense to me. You're still wrong, but you're not. I have mixed feelings on you suddenly. I have compassion and empathy for you suddenly, but you're a bad guy. And I love that. I love when antagonists are allowed to be nuanced too. And I'm very into the way it was handled. I would say the biggest fault for me on this book, other than I'm still unsure about the magic system, I still would like for it to be fleshed out a little bit better so that some of the things that seem inconsistent don't anymore. But other than that, I think the biggest fault in this book for me is the relationships of the book. This is a book that the relationship dynamics are really, really significant for the story. You know, these council members and their bond with each other, and certain individuals' bonds with Tari Sai, our main character, who's a great main character, by the way. I love Tari Sai. She's full of personality, and I really, really connect with her and her struggles. But a lot of the relationship development within, you know, these friendships and all the different dynamics in the story, a lot of it happens off page. We're just kind of told that they've developed a really strong bond, but there's enough time skipping that happens as Tari Sai is growing up that it's like we're with her and then 4 years passes and now she has a really deep relationship with one of these people. She has a really deep friendship with someone, and I'm just like, okay, I would like to see it so that I can feel the connection here too. And so much of the story depends on these characters' love and loyalty for each other that I feel like I needed a lot more on-page development happening in order for me to, you know, it's like the plot. It's the plot is their loyalty and love for each other. So I needed more of that in order to be fully in with it. All that said, I really enjoyed it. I am very curious. I'm definitely reading book 2, and I'm very curious to see where the story goes. I loved the plot. I love the world building. I love the immersive writing. I really love Tari Sai. I love the villain. I think that we need a lot more development on actually showing us the relationship dynamics. Could use some more development on fleshing out some of the side characters, and I would really, really like to flesh out the magic system a little bit better too. But I really, really enjoyed it. Something that I feel for both of these books is that they're just really different from what I read. I read a lot of fantasy, not so much sci-fi, some, but not that much. And I just don't feel like, I feel like both of these are doing something different, and I really, really like that. Neither one are ones that I'm gonna scream to the world about at this point, but I'm gonna keep reading and see, and I hope that I just keep loving them more and more as I keep reading in the series. This one only has 1 book left. But there you go, those are some spoiler-free thoughts on 2 books that I really enjoyed recently. I recommend both. I'm definitely gonna continue with both. I'd love to continue chatting with you more about it in the comments. Are you going to read either of these, or have you read them? Do you wanna talk to me about them? I'd love to chat. I post videos every Tuesday through Friday. I'll see you again soon. Bye.